Dr. Elena Valdez stood in the driveway of her childhood home, frantically patting down her pockets as rain began to fall. Her veterinary clinic's emergency pager had been buzzing nonstop for the past 10 minutes, and somewhere in the chaos of her cousin's engagement party, her car keys had vanished. The irony wasn't lost on her that, as someone who saved animals for a living, she couldn't save herself from this predicament. But what started as a simple case of misplaced keys would unravel a web of deception that had been building for years. And by the end of the night, it wouldn't be Elena who found herself locked out of everything she held dear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena had always been the golden child of the Valdez family, though she never sought that designation. At 32, she owned the most successful veterinary practice in Millbrook County, had recently purchased a stunning Victorian home on Elm Street, and maintained the kind of work-life balance that made her the subject of admiration and, unfortunately, envy among her extended family. Her success seemed effortless to outsiders, but Elena knew the countless sleepless nights during veterinary school, the loans she'd worked multiple jobs to pay off, and the risks she'd taken to open her own practice at 28. The Valdez family gatherings had become increasingly complicated over the years, particularly since Elena's cousin Beatrice moved back to town 6 months ago. Beatrice, 2 years Elena's senior, had returned to Millbrook after what she described as a difficult divorce in California. She'd moved into her mother's basement and taken a job at the local department store, a far cry from the marketing career she'd once boasted about during holiday phone calls. Elena had tried to be supportive when Beatrice first returned. She'd offered to help her cousin find better employment, had invited her to professional networking events, and had even suggested Beatrice might enjoy working at the veterinary clinic. Each offer had been declined with increasingly bitter comments about how easy it was to be generous when you'd never experienced real hardship. The tension had been building for months through small incidents that Elena tried to dismiss. Beatrice would make cutting remarks about Elena's house being too big for one person, her car being unnecessarily expensive, or her travel photos being showing off. During family dinners, Beatrice had developed a habit of redirecting conversations away from Elena's achievements, often by bringing up her own financial struggles or relationship failures in ways that made it impossible to respond without seeming insensitive. Elena's mother, Carmen, had pulled her aside after the last family barbecue to express concern. Beatrice seemed to be struggling with more than just her divorce, Carmen had observed. There was a bitterness there that went beyond normal adjustment difficulties. Elena had promised to be patient and understanding, reasoning that her cousin was going through a difficult period and would eventually find her footing. The engagement party for their youngest cousin, Miguel, was supposed to be a celebration that brought the family together. Elena had been looking forward to it, having grown close to Miguel during his college years when she'd helped him through a difficult period with academic anxiety. She'd even closed her clinic early that Saturday to help with party preparations, something she rarely did given the demanding nature of veterinary emergencies. The party was being held at their grandmother's house, the sprawling ranch-style home where Elena and her cousins had spent countless childhood summers. The backyard had been transformed with string lights, round tables covered in white linens, and a dance floor that their uncle had constructed that morning. Elena arrived early to help with final preparations, wearing a navy blue wrap dress that she'd chosen specifically because it was elegant but not attention-grabbing. Beatrice had been assigned to coordinate the gift table and guest book, a role that placed her at the entrance where she could greet arriving family members. Elena noticed immediately that her cousin had made an effort with her appearance, wearing a black cocktail dress that Elena recognized from their shopping trip the previous month. Elena had insisted on buying the dress when Beatrice admired it but claimed she couldn't afford it, thinking the gesture might help repair their strained relationship. As guests began arriving, Elena found herself naturally gravitating towards conversations about her work. Miguel's fiancée, Sarah, was particularly interested in hearing about Elena's recent expansion of the clinic's emergency services. Several family friends asked about their pets' health issues, and Elena found herself in the familiar and comfortable role of offering advice and reassurance. She noticed Beatrice watching these interactions with an expression she couldn't quite read. When Elena was describing a complex surgery she'd performed the previous week to save a dog hit by a car, she caught her cousin rolling her eyes and whispering something to their Aunt Maria that made both women laugh in a way that felt pointed and unkind. The first real incident occurred during dinner when Elena's grandmother stood to make a toast. Abuela Rosa had always been proud of all her grandchildren, but she made a point of mentioning Elena's recent recognition by the State Veterinary Association for her volunteer work with rescue animals. As the family applauded, Elena felt genuinely moved by her grandmother's words, but she also noticed Beatrice's jaw tighten and her hands clench in her lap. After dinner, as the party moved into its more relaxed phase with music and dancing, Elena stepped outside to take an emergency call from a client whose horse was showing signs of colic. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes as she guided the horse owner through initial assessment steps and arranged to meet them at their farm later that evening. When she returned to the party, Elena went to her purse to silence her phone and checked for any additional messages. She'd left her bag at the gift table where Beatrice was stationed, trusting family enough to leave her belongings unattended. As she approached the table, she saw Beatrice quickly step away from the area where Elena's purse had been sitting. Elena spent the next hour mingling with relatives she hadn't seen in months, catching up with cousins who lived in other states, and dancing with her grandfather, who insisted on showing off the moves he'd learned in his youth. The joy of being surrounded by family, celebrating Miguel's happiness, and sharing in the warmth of their close-knit community made her temporarily forget the subtle tensions she'd been sensing from Beatrice. It wasn't until the emergency pager started buzzing insistently that Elena realized she needed to leave. The horse owner had texted that the animal's condition was worsening, and as the only large animal veterinarian within 50 miles, Elena knew she couldn't delay. She found Miguel to explain that she had to leave early, apologizing profusely for missing the rest of his celebration. Miguel, who understood the demands of Elena's profession, hugged her warmly and thanked her for coming. As she gathered her belongings and said quick goodbyes to family members, Elena felt the familiar mixture of guilt and purpose that came with emergency calls. She loved her family gatherings, but she also knew that somewhere a horse was suffering and an owner was worried sick. It was only when she reached her car in the driveway that Elena realized her keys were missing. She checked her purse thoroughly, then retraced her steps to the gift table, thinking she might have dropped them when retrieving her phone earlier. The keys were nowhere to be found, despite searching under tables, behind decorations, and even in the trash cans in case they'd been accidentally swept up. Beatrice approached as Elena was crouched beside her car, using her phone's flashlight to check underneath the vehicle. Her cousin's expression showed what appeared to be genuine concern as she asked what was wrong. When Elena explained about the missing keys, Beatrice immediately offered to help search, suggesting they check inside the house in case Elena had set them down somewhere without thinking. For the next 15 minutes, the two women searched through the house together. Beatrice was particularly thorough, checking places Elena was certain she hadn't been, like the laundry room and her grandmother's bedroom. As they searched, Beatrice made sympathetic comments about how stressful it must be to have an emergency waiting while being unable to leave. Elena's frustration was mounting, not just because of the missing keys, but because she could see her cousin genuinely trying to help. She felt guilty for the suspicions she'd been harboring about Beatrice's attitude toward her success. Here was her cousin, giving up her evening to help solve Elena's problem, and Elena realized she'd been interpreting Beatrice's struggles through an uncharitable lens. The emergency pager continued to buzz with increasing urgency. Elena called her colleague Dr. Martinez, who was on backup call, but he was dealing with his own emergency 2 counties over and couldn't reach the horse for at least 2 hours. Elena knew that with colic, 2 hours could mean the difference between life and death for the animal. As the search stretched on, family members began to join the effort. Miguel and Sarah helped check the backyard, their uncle searched his truck, thinking Elena might have mistakenly placed the keys there, and even elderly relatives were peering under furniture and cushions. The collective effort should have been heartwarming, but Elena felt increasingly panicked about the horse waiting for her. Beatrice suggested they call a locksmith, offering to look up emergency services on her phone. She also mentioned that their cousin Roberto, who lived nearby, might be able to drive Elena to the emergency call if they couldn't resolve the key situation quickly. Throughout these suggestions, Beatrice maintained an attitude of helpful problem-solving that made Elena feel even more ashamed of her earlier suspicions. It was Miguel who finally suggested they check the security cameras his grandmother had recently installed after a rash of package thefts in the neighborhood. Abuela Rosa had been reluctant to embrace technology, but the cameras had given her peace of mind and had already helped identify one would-be thief the previous month. Elena felt a spark of hope as they gathered around Rosa's tablet to review the footage. The cameras covered the front entrance, the driveway, and part of the backyard where the gift table had been positioned. If Elena had dropped her keys anywhere in those areas, the cameras would have captured it. As they scrolled through the evening's footage, Elena watched herself arriving at the party, helping with decorations, and greeting arriving guests. The images were clear enough to see details like her putting her purse down at the gift table and later retrieving her phone to take the emergency call outside. What they saw next made Elena's blood run cold and changed everything she thought she knew about that evening, about her cousin, and about the months of subtle hostility she'd been experiencing. The footage showed Beatrice, during the 20 minutes Elena had been outside on her phone call, deliberately opening Elena's purse, removing her car keys, and walking toward the house with them in her hand. The silence in the room was deafening as the family watched the timestamp show Beatrice returning to the gift table 5 minutes later, her hands empty, with an expression of satisfaction that was unmistakable even on the grainy security footage. Elena felt the room spin as she processed what she was seeing. Her cousin hadn't just hidden her keys, she'd done it deliberately, knowing about the emergency call, knowing that an animal was suffering, and knowing that Elena would be trapped and unable to fulfill her professional responsibilities. Miguel was the first to speak, his voice tight with disbelief. He asked Beatrice directly what the family had just witnessed, giving her an opportunity to explain what appeared to be an inexplicable and cruel act. The question hung in the air as everyone turned to look at Beatrice, whose face had gone pale and whose helpful demeanor had completely disappeared. Beatrice's response was a stammered attempt to claim the footage was unclear, that perhaps she'd been trying to secure Elena's belongings, that the family was misinterpreting what they were seeing. But the evidence was undeniable, and her explanations only made the situation worse as it became clear she was lying about something they'd all witnessed with their own eyes. Elena found her voice, asking the question that cut to the heart of the betrayal. Why would Beatrice deliberately sabotage her ability to help a suffering animal? The answer, when it came, revealed depths of resentment and jealousy that shocked the entire family and set in motion a series of revelations that would change their relationships forever. Beatrice's composure finally cracked completely as she faced the circle of family members whose expressions ranged from shock to disgust. The helpful, concerned cousin, who had spent 15 minutes searching for keys she'd hidden herself, was gone, replaced by someone Elena barely recognized. The words that spilled out were filled with years of accumulated bitterness and resentment. She accused Elena of always being the favorite, of making everyone else look bad with her success, of flaunting her achievements and making the rest of the family feel inadequate. She claimed that Elena's emergency calls were just attention-seeking behavior, that she used her profession to make herself seem more important than everyone else, and that one night of inconvenience wouldn't kill anyone. The cruelty of prioritizing petty jealousy over an animal's suffering horrified the family, but Elena sensed there was something even deeper driving her cousin's actions. The level of calculated malice required to hide the keys while pretending to help search for them suggested this wasn't an impulsive act of spite, but part of a pattern of behavior. As Elena stood in her grandmother's living room, surrounded by family members who were struggling to process what they'd witnessed, she realized that the missing keys were just the beginning. Something about Beatrice's defensive anger and the specific nature of her accusations felt familiar, and Elena began to remember other incidents over the past months that she dismissed or explained away. The emergency pager had gone silent, and Elena knew that somewhere a horse owner was frantically trying to reach her while their animal suffered. The immediate crisis demanded action, but Elena also knew that what they'd uncovered that evening was bigger than missing keys and would require a reckoning that had been years in the making. Miguel volunteered to drive Elena to the emergency call while the family dealt with Beatrice and the implications of what they discovered. As Elena gathered the veterinary supplies she always kept in her car's trunk, she couldn't shake the feeling that her cousin's actions were part of something larger and more disturbing than simple sibling rivalry. The drive to the horse farm gave Elena time to process the evening's events and to remember details that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now appeared in a different light. There had been the family barbecue, where Elena's purse had been moved from where she'd left it, the birthday party where her professional business cards had mysteriously disappeared from her wallet, and the holiday gathering where Beatrice had seemed unusually interested in Elena's phone conversations with clients. At the farm, Elena worked efficiently to treat the horse, managing to stabilize the animal's condition and avoid the surgery that would have been necessary if she'd arrived much later. The horse owner, Mr. Hendricks, was profusely grateful and mentioned how much he'd worried when Elena hadn't responded to his earlier calls. As Elena packed up her equipment, she realized that Beatrice's actions could have cost an animal's life and destroyed Elena's professional reputation with a long-term client. The drive back to her grandmother's house was filled with a growing sense of dread as Elena began to piece together a pattern of small sabotages and interferences that had been escalating over the months since Beatrice returned to town. Each incident had been subtle enough to dismiss, but viewed together, they painted a picture of deliberate harassment designed to undermine Elena's success and reputation. When Elena returned to the party, she found a very different atmosphere than the one she'd left. Most of the guests had gone home, but the immediate family remained, sitting around her grandmother's dining room table with expressions of anger and disappointment. Beatrice was notably absent, and Elena learned that she'd left shortly after Elena's departure, claiming she was too upset to discuss the situation further. Her grandmother, whose disappointment was perhaps the most painful to witness, explained that after Elena left, they'd continued reviewing the security footage to see where Beatrice had hidden the keys. What they discovered was even more disturbing than the original theft. The camera showed Beatrice placing the keys in the outdoor trash can, meaning that if Elena hadn't found them that night, they would have been picked up by garbage collection on Monday morning. The maliciousness of that detail, ensuring that the keys wouldn't just be temporarily misplaced but permanently lost, revealed a level of spite that went beyond normal family conflict. Elena's uncle Carlos, who had always been protective of all his nieces, expressed the family's collective shock at discovering this level of calculated cruelty from someone they'd trusted and tried to help. As the family discussed the evening's events, other details began to emerge that painted an even more troubling picture. Elena's Aunt Maria admitted that Beatrice had been making disparaging comments about Elena for months, often when Elena wasn't present to defend herself. These comments had ranged from questioning Elena's dedication to family to suggesting that her success was somehow undeserved or came at the expense of others. Miguel mentioned that Beatrice had seemed unusually interested in Elena's schedule and professional commitments, often asking detailed questions about when Elena would be at family events and when she might need to leave for emergencies. What had seemed like normal family interest now appeared to be information gathering for potential sabotage. Elena's mother revealed that Beatrice had been asking probing questions about Elena's finances, her mortgage, and her business expenses, questions that had seemed inappropriate at the time, but that Carmen had attributed to Beatrice's own financial struggles. Now they wondered if Beatrice had been looking for vulnerabilities to exploit or information to use against Elena in some way. As these revelations accumulated, Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The picture emerging was of someone who had been systematically studying her life, looking for ways to cause problems, and gradually escalating from passive-aggressive comments to active sabotage. The missing keys weren't an isolated incident, but part of a campaign of harassment that had been building for months. Her grandmother, who prided herself on seeing the best in people and maintaining family harmony, looked older than her 83 years as she processed the extent of Beatrice's deception. She admitted that Beatrice had been coming to visit her frequently since returning to town, visits that Rosa had encouraged because she thought her granddaughter was lonely and adjusting to her new circumstances. During these visits, Rosa now realized Beatrice had been unusually interested in Elena's relationship with their grandmother, asking questions about Elena's visits, what they discussed, and how much Rosa was helping Elena with her new house and business. Beatrice had also shown particular interest in family financial matters, asking about inheritances and family assets in ways that had made Rosa uncomfortable, but that she'd attributed to Beatrice's own financial stress. The more the family talked, the more they realized that Beatrice's behavior had been escalating in both frequency and severity. What had started with snide comments and eye-rolling had progressed to asking inappropriate questions, spreading negative commentary when Elena wasn't present, and finally to outright sabotage that could have had serious professional and animal welfare consequences. Elena's uncle Roberto mentioned that Beatrice had asked him several times about Elena's veterinary clinic, specifically about how emergency calls work and whether Elena ever had to leave family events for work. At the time, he thought she was just trying to understand Elena's profession better, but now he wondered if she'd been planning the key incident for weeks. As the evening wound down and the family began to disperse, Elena felt emotionally drained, but also strangely relieved. For months, she'd been feeling like something was off in her relationship with Beatrice, but she'd blamed herself for being uncharitable toward a cousin who was going through a difficult time. Now she knew that her instincts had been correct, and that the tension she'd been sensing was real and justified. The drive home to her house on Elm Street gave Elena time to think about what would happen next. She knew that the family would rally around her and that Beatrice would likely face consequences for her actions, but she also knew that this incident had revealed something about her cousin that couldn't be easily forgiven or forgotten. The level of premeditation and the callous disregard for animal suffering showed a side of Beatrice that Elena had never suspected existed. As she pulled into her own driveway and sat in her car for a moment before going inside, Elena realized that while she'd been the immediate target of Beatrice's sabotage, the entire family had been deceived and manipulated.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Beatrice had spent months cultivating sympathy for her difficult circumstances while secretly harboring and acting on resentments that were toxic to family relationships. The next morning would bring phone calls from family members, discussions about how to handle the situation, and difficult decisions about Beatrice's place in future family gatherings. But for now, Elena was simply grateful to be home, with her keys safely in her possession and the knowledge that she was no longer questioning her own perceptions or making excuses for behavior that had been genuinely harmful. What Elena didn't yet know was that the missing keys were just the tip of the iceberg, and that in the coming days, much more serious revelations about Beatrice's activities would emerge, revelations that would shock the family even more than what they'd already discovered, and would have consequences that reached far beyond family dinners and birthday parties. The story of the hidden keys had ended with Elena getting her property back and her family understanding the truth about what had happened. But the larger story of what Beatrice had been doing since returning to Millbrook was just beginning to unfold, and it would prove that sometimes the people we trust most are capable of betrayals we never could have imagined. The Monday morning call from her grandmother came earlier than Elena expected. Rosa's voice carried a tremor that Elena had never heard before, not even during the family's most difficult times. Beatrice had returned to the house that morning to collect some belongings she'd left behind during the party cleanup, and Rosa had confronted her granddaughter about the security footage and the hidden keys. What followed was an explosion of accusations and confessions that left the elderly woman shaken and confused. Beatrice had initially denied everything, claiming the footage was unclear and that the family was ganging up on her during an already difficult period in her life. But when Rosa pressed her for an explanation, showing her the timestamp evidence and the clear images of her taking the keys, Beatrice's story began to unravel completely. Instead of showing remorse or offering an apology, she had launched into a tirade about Elena that revealed the depth of her resentment and the extent of her actions over the past months. Elena drove immediately to her grandmother's house, finding Rosa sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in front of her. The woman who had always been the steady anchor of their family looked fragile and bewildered, as if the foundation of her understanding about family loyalty and love had been shaken. Rosa explained that Beatrice had accused Elena of being manipulative and self-centered, claiming that Elena deliberately scheduled emergency calls to avoid family obligations and make herself appear more important than everyone else. But the accusations went deeper than professional jealousy. Beatrice had revealed that she'd been going through Elena's belongings during family gatherings for months, looking for evidence of what she called Elena's real character. She'd read personal letters, photographed financial documents with her phone, and even copied contact information from Elena's professional networking materials. The violation of privacy was staggering, but what Beatrice had done with that information was even more disturbing. Rosa's hands shook as she described how Beatrice had admitted to calling several of Elena's clients over the past few months, posing as a concerned family member. She'd told them stories about Elena's alleged personal problems, her supposed drinking issues, and her claimed irresponsibility with emergency calls. Beatrice had been careful to make these calls sound like worried family concerns rather than malicious attacks, but the intent had been to undermine Elena's professional reputation and potentially cost her business. Elena felt physically sick as she processed this information. She'd noticed that a few long-term clients had seemed distant during recent appointments, and one family had unexpectedly switched to a different veterinary clinic without explanation. At the time, Elena had assumed it was normal business fluctuation, but now she realized that Beatrice had been actively sabotaging her professional relationships through deliberate character assassination. The scope of the betrayal was overwhelming, but Rosa wasn't finished with her revelations. Beatrice had also admitted to accessing Elena's social media accounts during family gatherings, using Elena's logged-in phone to send inappropriate messages to professional contacts and delete important communications. She'd been particularly targeting Elena's relationships with other veterinarians in the region, sending messages that made Elena appear unprofessional or unreliable. Elena immediately pulled out her phone to check her professional social media accounts and email, scrolling through recent activity with growing horror. There were indeed messages she didn't remember sending, responses to professional inquiries that were dismissive or rude, and deleted conversations that she now realized might have contained important business opportunities. Beatrice had been systematically destroying Elena's professional network from the inside, using Elena's own accounts to make her appear unstable and unreliable. Rosa mentioned that Beatrice had seemed particularly proud of one incident where she'd used Elena's phone to decline a lucrative contract with the county animal shelter, making Elena appear disinterested in community service. Elena remembered that missed opportunity, which had puzzled her at the time because she'd been expecting the call and had specifically asked the shelter director to contact her. Now she understood that Beatrice had intercepted and sabotaged that opportunity deliberately. As Elena sat in her grandmother's kitchen, trying to process the magnitude of her cousin's betrayal, her phone rang with a call from Dr. Martinez, her backup colleague. His voice was tense as he asked whether Elena was having personal problems that might be affecting her work. Apparently, someone claiming to be Elena's family member had called his office that morning, expressing concern about Elena's emotional stability and suggesting that she might not be fit to handle emergency cases. Elena's blood ran cold as she realized that Beatrice's campaign wasn't over. Even after being caught and confronted, her cousin was continuing to make malicious calls designed to destroy Elena's reputation. Dr. Martinez explained that the caller had claimed Elena was having a nervous breakdown and had been behaving erratically at family events, suggesting that she might be a danger to the animals in her care. The professional implications were terrifying. Veterinary medicine was a field where reputation and trust were everything, and allegations about emotional instability or erratic behavior could end a career permanently. Elena explained the situation to Dr. Martinez, who was shocked by the deliberate nature of the attack, but assured her that he would help spread the truth among their professional network. Elena's grandmother looked even more distressed as she listened to the phone conversation, realizing that Beatrice's actions were potentially destroying Elena's livelihood as well as her family relationships. Rosa had always believed that family problems should stay within the family, but she was beginning to understand that Beatrice's behavior had crossed lines that went far beyond normal family conflict. After ending the call with Dr. Martinez, Elena knew she needed to take immediate action to protect her practice and her reputation. She called her attorney, explaining the situation and asking about legal options for dealing with harassment and defamation. The attorney advised her to document everything carefully and warned that the professional damage might be harder to repair than any personal harm. Elena spent the rest of the morning making calls to professional contacts, explaining the situation and asking them to disregard any communications they might have received from someone claiming to be her family member. The conversations were humiliating, as she had to essentially admit that a family member had been actively trying to destroy her career. Most of her colleagues were supportive, but she could hear the concern in their voices about the implications of such personal drama affecting professional relationships. The county animal shelter director was particularly understanding when Elena called to explain about the declined contract opportunity. She revealed that the person who had called to decline on Elena's behalf had seemed strange and unprofessional, using language that didn't match Elena's usual communication style. The director had been planning to call Elena directly to verify the decision, but had gotten busy with other matters and forgotten to follow up. As Elena made these damage control calls, she began to understand the full scope of what Beatrice had been attempting to accomplish. This wasn't just jealousy or resentment, it was a systematic campaign to destroy Elena's professional life and force her to leave town in disgrace. The level of calculation and persistence required for such a campaign revealed a side of her cousin that was genuinely frightening. Her phone rang again, this time with a call from her uncle Carlos, who had spent the morning talking to other family members about the previous night's revelations. Carlos had always been protective of his nieces and had tried to remain neutral during family conflicts, but what he'd learned about Beatrice's activities had pushed him past his tolerance for family diplomacy. Carlos explained that he'd been making calls to verify some of Beatrice's claims about her financial situation and her divorce. What he discovered was that much of what Beatrice had told the family about her circumstances wasn't true. The divorce hadn't been as financially devastating as she'd claimed, and she'd actually received a substantial settlement that should have allowed her to live comfortably without moving back to Millbrook. More disturbing was Carlos's discovery that Beatrice had been using her mother's address and the family's sympathy to qualify for financial assistance programs she wasn't entitled to receive. She'd been collecting unemployment benefits while working part-time jobs for cash, claiming poverty while maintaining a lifestyle that her reported income couldn't support. Elena felt a growing sense of unreality as these revelations accumulated. The cousin she'd grown up with, the family member she'd tried to help and support, had been living a completely fabricated life while actively working to destroy Elena's real one. The scope of the deception was staggering, and Elena began to wonder what else the family didn't know about Beatrice's activities. Carlos mentioned that he'd also discovered Beatrice had been using family members' names and addresses for various schemes, including opening credit accounts that she'd been making minimum payments on to avoid immediate detection. She'd been using the family's good credit history and reputation in the community to access financial resources while living a lifestyle that appeared modest on the surface. The pattern that emerged was of someone who had become skilled at manipulation and deception, using family loyalty and sympathy as cover for increasingly serious fraudulent activities. Elena realized that her success and visibility in the community might have made her a target not just for jealousy, but because Beatrice saw her as an obstacle to continued exploitation of the family's resources and reputation. Elena's mother called shortly before lunch, her voice tight with anger and disappointment. Carmen had spent the morning reviewing financial documents and family records, trying to understand the extent of Beatrice's deceptions. What she'd found was evidence that Beatrice had been forging family member signatures on various documents and had even attempted to use Elena's name and credentials for fraudulent purposes. Specifically, Carmen had discovered that Beatrice had been claiming professional credentials she didn't possess, telling potential employers and clients that she was related to a successful veterinarian who could provide professional references. She'd been using Elena's reputation to gain employment opportunities and had even listed Elena as a professional reference without her knowledge or permission. Elena felt violated in a way that went beyond the professional sabotage. Beatrice hadn't just been trying to destroy Elena's career, she'd also been exploiting it for her own benefit while simultaneously working to undermine it. The contradiction was mind-boggling, but it revealed the depth of Beatrice's sense of entitlement and her willingness to use family relationships for personal gain. Carmen also revealed that she'd found evidence Beatrice had been going through family financial records during her visits to various relatives' homes. She'd photographed bank statements, investment documents, and insurance policies, apparently gathering information about the family's financial assets and vulnerabilities. The invasion of privacy was complete and systematic, suggesting that Beatrice had been planning something much larger than simple harassment. Elena's afternoon was interrupted by a call from the Millbrook Police Department. Detective Sarah Thompson explained that they'd received several reports that morning from people who had been contacted by someone claiming to be Elena's family member, making serious allegations about Elena's mental health and professional competence. The caller had been suggesting that Elena was dangerous and should be investigated by animal control authorities. The detective explained that while the reports were clearly malicious, they still needed to be documented and investigated properly. Elena would need to come to the station to provide a statement and evidence about the harassment campaign. Detective Thompson mentioned that what Elena was describing sounded like a pattern of criminal harassment and possibly fraud, depending on the extent of the financial deceptions that had been discovered. Elena drove to the police station with a folder of evidence that had been accumulating throughout the day. The documentation included the security footage from her grandmother's house, screenshots of the suspicious social media activity on her accounts, records of the malicious phone calls to professional contacts, and the financial documents that Carlos and Carmen had discovered. Detective Thompson was thorough in her questioning, helping Elena organize the evidence into a chronological pattern that showed escalation from invasion of privacy to active sabotage to potential fraud. The detective explained that harassment cases involving family members were often complicated, but the evidence Elena was presenting showed clear criminal behavior that went beyond normal family disputes. As Elena provided her statement, she began to understand that Beatrice's actions weren't just personal attacks, but potentially serious crimes that could result in felony charges. The use of Elena's identity for fraudulent purposes, the systematic harassment campaign designed to damage her professional reputation, and the financial deceptions involving other family members all constituted serious legal violations. Detective Thompson mentioned that the police had been receiving an increasing number of reports about harassment campaigns conducted through social media and professional networks. Elena's case was particularly serious because it involved someone with access to personal information and professional credentials who had used that access for sustained malicious activity. Elena left the police station feeling emotionally drained, but also relieved that the situation was finally being taken seriously by authorities. For months, she'd been feeling like something was wrong, but had blamed herself for being paranoid or uncharitable. Now she had validation that her instincts had been correct and that the problems she'd been experiencing were real and serious. Her phone had accumulated dozens of messages while she was at the police station. Family members were calling with new discoveries about Beatrice's deceptions. Professional contacts were reaching out with concerns about the morning's malicious calls, and several clients were asking for clarification about rumors they'd heard regarding Elena's stability and competence. Elena spent the evening returning calls and emails, carefully explaining the situation and providing evidence where appropriate. The conversations were exhausting, but she was grateful for the support she received from almost everyone she spoke with. Her professional reputation, while damaged, seemed salvageable if she continued to be proactive about addressing the false information that had been spread. Her grandmother called that evening to report that Beatrice had returned to the house one more time, this time to demand money she claimed the family owed her for expenses related to her return to Millbrook. When Rosa had refused and mentioned the police investigation, Beatrice had become threatening, suggesting that the family would regret not supporting her during her difficult time. Rosa was frightened by the encounter, describing a side of Beatrice that seemed completely unrecognizable from the granddaughter she'd known and loved. The threats had been vague but unsettling, involving suggestions that Beatrice could make life very difficult for family members who didn't cooperate with her demands for financial support. Elena immediately called Detective Thompson to report the threatening behavior, and the detective advised Rosa to avoid any further contact with Beatrice until the investigation was complete. The pattern of escalation was concerning, and the detective wanted to ensure that Beatrice didn't have additional opportunities to intimidate family members or destroy evidence. As Elena prepared for bed that evening, she realized that the missing car keys had been just the visible tip of an iceberg of deception and malice that had been building for months. The simple act of hiding her keys had revealed a campaign of harassment and fraud that could have destroyed her career and her family relationships if it had continued unchecked. The next morning brought more revelations as family members continued to discover evidence of Beatrice's deceptions. Elena's Aunt Maria called to report that she'd found suspicious activity on her credit report, including inquiries and accounts that she hadn't authorized. Uncle Roberto had discovered that someone had been using his address to receive mail for various financial schemes, and Cousin Miguel had found evidence that his identity had been used for online transactions he'd never made. The scope of Beatrice's criminal activity was expanding beyond what anyone had initially suspected. What had appeared to be a personal vendetta against Elena was revealing itself as part of a much larger pattern of exploitation that had affected multiple family members. Beatrice had been using her position as a trusted family member to gain access to personal information and financial resources that she'd been systematically exploiting. Elena met with her attorney again to discuss the expanding legal implications. The evidence now suggested identity theft, credit fraud, and potentially organized financial crimes that went far beyond simple harassment. The attorney recommended that all affected family members file police reports and work with financial institutions to protect their credit and accounts. Detective Thompson called to schedule follow-up interviews with multiple family members, explaining that the investigation had grown beyond a simple harassment case. The Financial Crimes Unit would be getting involved, and there might be federal implications if Beatrice had been using mail or internet services for fraudulent activities across state lines. Elena found herself in the strange position of being both a victim and a catalyst for uncovering a much larger criminal enterprise. Her success and visibility had made her a target, but the investigation triggered by her harassment had revealed that Beatrice had been victimizing the entire family for months while using their trust and love as cover for increasingly serious criminal activities. The revelation that hurt Elena most wasn't the professional sabotage or even the identity theft. It was the realization that every moment of apparent-family connection over the past months had been calculated manipulation. Every conversation, every shared meal, every expression of concern had been part of a performance designed to maintain access to information and resources that Beatrice could exploit. Elena's phone rang with another call from a professional contact, this time Dr. Patricia Wilkins from the State Veterinary Association. Dr. Wilkins explained that someone had filed a formal complaint against Elena with the licensing board, alleging professional misconduct and emotional instability. The complaint included detailed allegations about specific incidents that Elena knew hadn't happened, but that were crafted skillfully enough to sound plausible to investigators. The professional licensing complaint was perhaps the most serious escalation yet, as it threatened Elena's ability to practice veterinary medicine at all. Even false allegations could trigger investigations that might suspend her license pending resolution, effectively destroying her practice and her livelihood while the matter was resolved through lengthy bureaucratic processes. Dr. Wilkins assured Elena that the association would investigate thoroughly and that false complaints were taken as seriously as legitimate ones. However, she warned that Elena would need to provide comprehensive documentation to refute the allegations, and that the process could take months to resolve completely. Elena realized that Beatrice had been planning this escalation for some time, gathering information and crafting allegations that would be difficult to disprove quickly. The sophistication of the attack suggested that Beatrice had researched professional licensing procedures and had designed her complaints to maximize damage while minimizing her own legal exposure. As Elena prepared for what she knew would be a long legal battle to clear her name and protect her family, she reflected on how a simple case of missing car keys had revealed a conspiracy that threatened everything she'd worked to build. The cousin she'd tried to help and understand had been systematically working to destroy her life while exploiting their entire family's trust and resources. The revelation that hurt Elena most wasn't the professional sabotage or even the identity theft. It was the realization that every moment of apparent family connection over the past months had been calculated manipulation. Every conversation, every shared meal, every expression of concern had been part of a performance designed to maintain access to information and resources that Beatrice could exploit. Elena's phone rang with another call from a professional contact, this time Dr. Patricia Wilkins from the State Veterinary Association. Dr. Wilkins explained that someone had filed a formal complaint against Elena with the licensing board, alleging professional misconduct and emotional instability. The complaint included detailed allegations about specific incidents that Elena knew hadn't happened, but that were crafted skillfully enough to sound plausible to investigators. The professional licensing complaint was perhaps the most serious escalation yet, as it threatened Elena's ability to practice veterinary medicine at all. Even false allegations could trigger investigations that might suspend her license pending resolution, effectively destroying her practice and her livelihood while the matter was resolved through lengthy bureaucratic processes. Dr. Wilkins assured Elena that the association would investigate thoroughly and that false complaints were taken as seriously as legitimate ones.
However, she warned that Elena would need to provide comprehensive documentation to refute the allegations, and that the process could take months to resolve completely. Elena realized that Beatrice had been planning this escalation for some time, gathering information and crafting allegations that would be difficult to disprove quickly. The sophistication of the attack suggested that Beatrice had researched professional licensing procedures and had designed her complaints to maximize damage while minimizing her own legal exposure. As Elena prepared for what she knew would be a long legal battle to clear her name and protect her family, she reflected on how a simple case of missing car keys had revealed a conspiracy that threatened everything she'd worked to build. The cousin she'd tried to help and understand had been systematically working to destroy her life while exploiting their entire family's trust and resources.
But Elena also realized that if the keys hadn't gone missing that night, if the security cameras hadn't captured Beatrice's actions, the harassment and fraud might have continued indefinitely. Beatrice's greed and malice had ultimately led to her exposure, and now the family could begin the process of protecting themselves and seeking justice for the betrayals they'd endured. The story was far from over, and Elena knew that the legal proceedings ahead would be challenging and painful. But for the first time since Beatrice had returned to Millbrook, Elena felt like she was fighting back rather than simply enduring attacks she didn't understand. The truth was finally emerging, and with it came the possibility of real resolution and justice for everyone who had been victimized by someone they'd trusted and loved. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Detective Thompson called Elena 3 days after their initial meeting with news that would change everything. Beatrice had been arrested that morning at her mother's house, charged with multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, and criminal harassment. The evidence had been overwhelming once investigators began following the paper trail of her activities. Elena felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness as she processed the news. Relief that the nightmare was finally ending, but sadness that it had come to this point with a family member she'd once loved and trusted. Detective Thompson explained that Beatrice had initially tried to deny the charges, but the digital evidence was irrefutable. Her phone contained screenshots of family members' financial documents, saved login credentials for accounts she'd accessed without permission, and detailed notes about Elena's schedule and professional commitments. The detective revealed that Beatrice had been running similar schemes in California before her supposed divorce, which explained the real reason for her return to Millbrook. She'd been forced to leave after being discovered defrauding her ex-husband's business associates and faced potential criminal charges there as well. Her return to family wasn't motivated by loneliness or financial hardship, but by the need to establish new victims in a community where she was trusted and had access to personal information. Elena's attorney called later that morning with additional news about the professional licensing complaint. The State Veterinary Association had conducted a preliminary investigation and determined that the allegations were fabricated. Dr. Wilkins had explained that the complaint contained details about protocols and procedures that demonstrated the complainant had no real knowledge of veterinary medicine, suggesting the allegations had been researched online rather than based on actual experience. More importantly, the association had traced the complaint back to a computer at the public library in Millbrook, where security cameras had captured Beatrice filing the false report. The deliberate nature of the professional attack, combined with the criminal charges, meant that Beatrice would likely face additional charges for filing false reports with regulatory agencies. Elena spent the morning calling professional contacts to share the news about Beatrice's arrest and the vindication of her professional reputation. The conversations were overwhelmingly supportive, with many colleagues expressing relief that the strange rumors and accusations now had an explanation. Dr. Martinez mentioned that he'd been concerned about Elena but hadn't known how to address what seemed like personal problems affecting her work. The county animal shelter director called to formally reinstate the contract opportunity that Beatrice had sabotaged months earlier. She explained that the shelter board had been confused by the apparent disinterest from someone with Elena's reputation for community service, but had decided to approach her again based on recommendations from other veterinarians who vouched for her character. Elena's grandmother was struggling with the news of Beatrice's arrest more than anyone else in the family.
Rosa had always believed that love and patience could solve any family problem, and the depth of Beatrice's deception and criminality challenged everything she'd believed about family loyalty and forgiveness. Elena drove to her grandmother's house to find the elderly woman sitting in her garden, staring at the flowers she'd planted with Beatrice's help just weeks earlier. Rosa's voice was filled with pain as she explained how betrayed she felt by someone she'd tried so hard to help and support. Beatrice had spent hours with her grandmother over the past months, listening to stories about the family's history, asking questions about relatives and traditions, and appearing to be genuinely interested in reconnecting with her roots. Now Rosa realized that those conversations had been information-gathering sessions designed to identify vulnerabilities and opportunities for exploitation. The elderly woman was particularly hurt by the discovery that Beatrice had been photographing family documents and memorabilia during her visits, including old letters, photographs, and financial records that Rosa had shared as part of telling family stories. The violation of trust felt complete and irreparable, especially since Rosa had been the strongest advocate for giving Beatrice time and support to rebuild her life. Elena spent the afternoon with her grandmother, helping her process the emotions of betrayal and disappointment while also addressing practical concerns about security and privacy. They went through the house together, identifying documents and information that Beatrice had accessed, and Rosa decided to change the locks and install additional security measures to protect against future intrusions. The conversation with her grandmother helped Elena understand her own conflicted emotions about the situation. Like Rosa, she'd been raised to believe in family loyalty and the importance of supporting relatives during difficult times. Discovering that those values had been exploited and weaponized against them was deeply painful, but it also reinforced the importance of maintaining those values with people who genuinely deserve trust and support. Elena's mother called that evening with news that the extended family was planning to meet the following weekend to discuss how to handle the aftermath of Beatrice's arrest and the discovery of her criminal activities. Carmen explained that several family members were dealing with identity theft issues and financial fraud that would require ongoing attention, and they needed to coordinate their responses to ensure everyone was protected. The family meeting was held at Uncle Carlos's house, chosen because it was one of the few homes that Beatrice hadn't visited extensively during her time back in Millbrook. As family members gathered, Elena was struck by how the crisis had brought them closer together while simultaneously making them more cautious about trust and privacy. Everyone was sharing information about their experiences with Beatrice, creating a comprehensive picture of her deception. Aunt Maria had discovered that Beatrice had been accessing her email account during family gatherings, reading personal correspondence, and using information from those emails to manipulate family dynamics. She'd found evidence that Beatrice had been forwarding certain emails to herself and deleting others, effectively controlling the flow of information within the family to create conflicts and misunderstandings. Uncle Roberto revealed that Beatrice had been using his address to establish residency for various benefits, including voter registration, library cards, and government assistance programs.
She'd been careful to intercept mail before Roberto noticed, but the Postal Service had flagged suspicious activity when multiple identities began receiving benefits at the same address. Cousin Miguel shared his discovery that Beatrice had been using his Social Security number to open online accounts and make purchases, taking advantage of his good credit and clean financial history. The fraud had been sophisticated enough to avoid immediate detection, but the investigation had revealed a pattern of small transactions designed to test the accounts before attempting larger theft. As each family member shared their experiences, a picture emerged of systematic exploitation that had affected almost everyone Beatrice had contact with. She'd been careful to spread her criminal activities across multiple victims to avoid detection, but the cumulative impact on the family was devastating. The emotional betrayal was compounded by practical concerns about credit repair, financial security, and ongoing vulnerability to future attacks. Elena's attorney attended part of the family meeting to explain the legal processes ahead and the family's options for seeking restitution through both criminal and civil proceedings. He warned that recovering financial losses from someone like Beatrice would be challenging since her assets were limited and much of the stolen money had already been spent. However, the criminal conviction would create a foundation for civil lawsuits and might help with insurance claims related to identity theft. The attorney also explained that family members might be called to testify in Beatrice's criminal trial, which could be emotionally difficult but was necessary to ensure appropriate consequences for her actions. He emphasized that the strength of their case lay in the systematic documentation of Beatrice's activities and the digital evidence that investigators had recovered. Detective Thompson joined the meeting to provide updates on the investigation and explain what family members could expect as the case proceeded through the criminal justice system. She revealed that Beatrice had been denied bail due to the risk of flight and the ongoing threat she posed to victims' safety and financial security. The detective also mentioned that investigators were working with authorities in California to coordinate charges related to Beatrice's previous fraudulent activities. The detective's most surprising revelation was that Beatrice wasn't working alone. She'd been part of a larger network of individuals who specialized in exploiting family relationships and community trust to commit identity theft and financial fraud. The network operated by having members return to their home communities where they had access to personal information and established relationships that could be exploited. Elena felt a chill as she realized that her family's experience wasn't unique and that there were other families dealing with similar betrayals from trusted relatives who had been recruited into criminal enterprises. The systematic nature of the exploitation made it feel less personal but somehow more disturbing, as it suggested that Beatrice had been trained in techniques for manipulating family emotions and exploiting trust. The investigation had uncovered communications between Beatrice and her criminal associates, including detailed discussions about which family members would be the most profitable targets and strategies for maintaining their trust while maximizing financial exploitation. Elena's success and visibility had made her a particularly attractive target because discrediting her would create maximum disruption within the family while eliminating someone who might be capable of detecting and stopping the fraud. Detective Thompson explained that the network had been operating for several years across multiple states, with members typically targeting their own families and communities before moving on to establish new identities and victim pools. Beatrice's arrest was part of a larger federal investigation that would likely result in additional arrests and prosecutions in the coming months. As the family meeting concluded, Elena felt emotionally drained, but also grateful for the support and solidarity she'd experienced from her relatives. The crisis had revealed ugly truths about someone they'd loved, but it had also demonstrated the strength of their genuine family bonds and their commitment to protecting each other from future harm. Elena returned to work the following Monday with a sense of relief and renewed focus that she hadn't felt in months. The cloud of suspicion and uncertainty that had been hanging over her professional life was finally lifting, and she could concentrate on providing the best possible care for her animal patients without worrying about sabotage or character assassination. Her first appointment was with the Hendricks family, whose horse she'd treated the night of the engagement party. Mr. Hendricks mentioned that he'd heard about Elena's family troubles through the community grapevine and expressed admiration for how she'd handled the situation with grace and professionalism. The validation from a respected community member meant more to Elena than she could express. Throughout the week, Elena received calls and visits from professional colleagues who wanted to express their support and share their own experiences with malicious attacks on their reputations. Dr. Martinez mentioned that he'd encountered similar situations where family dynamics had spilled over into professional relationships, and he praised Elena for her transparency in addressing the situation directly rather than trying to hide or minimize the problem. The State Veterinary Association formally cleared Elena of all allegations, issuing a statement that praised her professionalism and community service. Dr. Wilkins called personally to apologize for any stress the investigation had caused and to assure Elena that the association would be implementing new procedures to prevent similar false complaints from disrupting members' careers. Elena's practice began to recover quickly as word spread about the resolution of her legal troubles. Several new clients mentioned that they'd chosen her specifically because of how she'd handled the crisis, viewing her transparency and professionalism as evidence of the integrity they wanted in their veterinarian. The county animal shelter contract was finalized, providing Elena with steady additional income and the opportunity to expand her community service work. 2 weeks after Beatrice's arrest, Elena received an unexpected call from a woman named Jennifer Morrison, who identified herself as a victim advocate with the federal task force investigating the identity theft network.
Jennifer explained that Elena's case had been instrumental in uncovering the larger criminal enterprise, and she wanted to invite Elena to participate in a victim impact program that would help other families recognize and respond to similar exploitation. Jennifer revealed that Elena's detailed documentation and proactive response to the harassment had provided investigators with crucial evidence about the network's methods and organization. The security footage from the engagement party, combined with Elena's careful tracking of the professional sabotage, had helped establish patterns that connected Beatrice's activities to similar crimes in other states. Elena agreed to participate in the victim advocacy program, recognizing that her painful experience could potentially help protect other families from similar betrayals. Jennifer explained that the program would involve speaking at law enforcement training sessions and community awareness events, sharing her story to help people recognize the warning signs of family-based identity theft and fraud. The first speaking engagement was at a regional conference for financial crimes investigators, where Elena shared her experience with law enforcement professionals from across the state. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many investigators commenting that Elena's case highlighted the importance of taking family-based fraud seriously and investigating beyond the immediate victim to identify larger criminal patterns. Elena found the speaking engagements therapeutic as well as helpful to others.
Telling her story in a context where it could prevent similar crimes gave meaning to the painful experience and helped her process the complex emotions of betrayal and recovery. The feedback from other victims and professionals reinforced her decision to be open about what had happened rather than trying to hide or minimize the impact. Her grandmother Rosa gradually began to heal from the emotional trauma of discovering Beatrice's true nature. Elena visited her several times a week, and they spent time together working in the garden and sharing memories of better times with family members who genuinely deserved their love and trust. Rosa mentioned that she was considering writing down the family's real history to preserve authentic stories and relationships for future generations. The extended family developed new traditions and security practices to protect themselves while maintaining the close relationships they valued. They established a family communication network that would help them verify unusual requests for personal information or financial assistance, and they created shared resources for monitoring credit reports and financial accounts. Elena's professional reputation was stronger than ever, enhanced by the respect she'd gained for handling the crisis with integrity and transparency. She received an invitation to join the board of directors for the State Veterinary Association, recognizing her leadership during a difficult situation and her commitment to professional standards. The opportunity would allow her to help other veterinarians facing similar challenges. The criminal case against Beatrice proceeded efficiently through the court system, with her eventual guilty plea to multiple felony charges resulting in a substantial prison sentence. The judge commented during sentencing that the systematic nature of her crimes and the exploitation of family trust warranted significant punishment to deter similar offenses and protect potential future victims. Elena attended the sentencing hearing along with several family members, finding closure in seeing appropriate consequences for the betrayals they'd endured. Beatrice showed no remorse during the proceedings, maintaining that she'd been driven to desperate measures by the family's lack of support during her difficult times. Her attitude reinforced Elena's understanding that the cousin she'd once loved had been replaced by someone who felt entitled to exploit others without regard for the harm she caused. The federal investigation resulted in the prosecution of the entire identity theft network, with Beatrice's cooperation helping to identify other victims and criminal associates. Elena received regular updates about the broader case and was gratified to learn that dozens of other families would receive justice for similar betrayals by relatives who had been recruited into the criminal enterprise. Elena's victim advocacy work expanded as she became a recognized expert on family-based financial crimes. She worked with law enforcement agencies, victim services organizations, and community groups to develop educational materials and prevention programs. The work was demanding but fulfilling, giving her a sense of purpose that went beyond her veterinary practice. 6 months after Beatrice's arrest, Elena's life had achieved a new equilibrium that was healthier and more secure than before the crisis. Her professional reputation was not only restored but enhanced. Her family relationships were stronger and more honest, and she'd found meaningful ways to help others avoid similar experiences. Elena's romantic life had also begun to flourish during this period of personal growth and increased community involvement. She'd met David Chen, a wildlife biologist who worked with the State Environmental Agency during one of her victim advocacy speaking engagements. Their shared commitment to helping others and protecting vulnerable populations created an immediate connection that had developed into a serious relationship. David had been impressed by Elena's resilience and integrity during their first conversation, and he'd supported her through the final stages of the legal proceedings against Beatrice. His presence in her life represented new beginnings and the possibility of building relationships based on genuine trust and mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. The engagement party for cousin Miguel, which had started the entire ordeal, seemed like a lifetime ago rather than just months in the past. Miguel and Sarah had been incredibly supportive throughout Elena's crisis, and their wedding the following spring became a celebration not just of their love, but of the family's recovery and renewed strength. Elena served as matron of honor at Miguel's wedding, a role that felt especially meaningful given how the events at his engagement party had ultimately led to truth and justice. Her speech at the reception focused on the importance of authentic relationships and the resilience of genuine love, themes that resonated deeply with family members who had lived through the betrayal and recovery together. The wedding was also the first major family gathering since Beatrice's arrest, and Elena was struck by how much more relaxed and genuine the interactions felt without the undercurrent of manipulation and hidden agendas. Family members were more open with each other, more protective of their personal information, but also more appreciative of the relationships they could truly trust. Elena's grandmother, Rosa, had become something of a family security expert, having researched identity protection and fraud prevention extensively after her experience with Beatrice. She'd installed new security systems, updated her financial accounts, and developed protocols for verifying unusual requests or communications. Her transformation from victim to informed advocate inspired other elderly family members to take similar protective measures. The financial recovery for family members varied depending on the extent of their individual losses and the success of their insurance claims and restitution efforts. Elena's losses had been primarily professional rather than financial, and her practice had actually grown stronger as a result of the publicity surrounding her integrity during the crisis. Uncle Roberto had recovered most of his identity theft losses through his credit card company's fraud protection programs, but the process had been time-consuming and stressful. Aunt Maria's email security had been completely overhauled, and she'd learned to use more sophisticated privacy settings and verification procedures for all electronic communications. Elena's work with the Victim Advocacy Program led to opportunities for consultation with financial institutions and technology companies working to develop better fraud detection and prevention systems. Her insights into how family-based fraud operated differently from other types of identity theft helped improve security measures and victim protection protocols. The anniversary of the engagement party incident found Elena in a completely different place than she could have imagined during those dark hours searching for her missing keys. She was stronger professionally, more secure personally, and more connected to her authentic family relationships than ever before. The trauma had been real and significant, but the growth and resilience that emerged from it had created positive changes that extended far beyond her individual experience. Elena continued to receive updates about Beatrice through the criminal justice system, learning that her former cousin was serving her sentence while participating in programs designed to address criminal thinking patterns and substance abuse issues. There was no indication that Beatrice had developed genuine remorse or insight into the harm she'd caused, but Elena had found peace with the knowledge that appropriate consequences had been imposed and that other potential victims were protected. The victim advocacy work remained an important part of Elena's life, expanding to include training programs for family counselors, financial advisors, and community organizations. Her expertise was regularly requested for conferences and workshops, and she'd begun writing articles about family-based fraud for professional publications and consumer protection websites. The work was demanding but fulfilling, giving her a sense of purpose that went beyond her veterinary practice. 6 months after Beatrice's arrest, Elena's life had achieved a new equilibrium that was healthier and more secure than before the crisis. Her professional reputation was not only restored but enhanced, her family relationships were stronger and more honest, and she'd found meaningful ways to help others avoid similar experiences. Elena's romantic life had also begun to flourish during this period of personal growth and increased community involvement.
She'd met David Chen, a wildlife biologist who worked with the state environmental agency, during one of her victim advocacy speaking engagements. Their shared commitment to helping others and protecting vulnerable populations created an immediate connection that had developed into a serious relationship. David had been impressed by Elena's resilience and integrity during their first conversation, and he'd supported her through the final stages of the legal proceedings against Beatrice. His presence in her life represented new beginnings and the possibility of building relationships based on genuine trust and mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. The engagement party for cousin Miguel, which had started the entire ordeal, seemed like a lifetime ago rather than just months in the past. Miguel and Sarah had been incredibly supportive throughout Elena's crisis, and their wedding the following spring became a celebration not just of their love, but of the family's recovery and renewed strength. Elena served as matron of honor at Miguel's wedding, a role that felt especially meaningful given how the events at his engagement party had ultimately led to truth and justice. Her speech at the reception focused on the importance of authentic relationships and the resilience of genuine love, themes that resonated deeply with family members who had lived through the betrayal and recovery together. The wedding was also the first major family gathering since Beatrice's arrest, and Elena was struck by how much more relaxed and genuine the interactions felt without the undercurrent of manipulation and hidden agendas. Family members were more open with each other, more protective of their personal information, but also more appreciative of the relationships they could truly trust. Elena's grandmother, Rosa, had become something of a family security expert, having researched identity protection and fraud prevention extensively after her experience with Beatrice. She'd installed new security systems, updated her financial accounts, and developed protocols for verifying unusual requests or communications. Her transformation from victim to informed advocate inspired other elderly family members to take similar protective measures. The financial recovery for family members varied depending on the extent of their individual losses and the success of their insurance claims and restitution efforts. Elena's losses had been primarily professional rather than financial, and her practice had actually grown stronger as a result of the publicity surrounding her integrity during the crisis. Uncle Roberto had recovered most of his identity theft losses through his credit card company's fraud protection programs, but the process had been time-consuming and stressful. Aunt Maria's email security.
Elena's relationship with David had progressed to the point where they were discussing marriage and starting a family together. Their shared values and mutual support during challenging circumstances had created a foundation for partnership that felt both secure and exciting. David had been particularly impressed by Elena's ability to maintain compassion for others while protecting herself from further harm. The security measures that Elena had implemented in her personal and professional life had become second nature, providing protection without paranoia or excessive restriction of normal activities. She'd learned to trust her instincts about people and situations while maintaining openness to genuine relationships and opportunities for connection. Elena's veterinary practice had expanded to include a satellite clinic in a neighboring county, allowing her to serve a broader community while maintaining the personal relationships that made her work meaningful. The growth had been carefully planned to ensure quality care standards and had created employment opportunities for other veterinary professionals in the region. The family's experience with Beatrice had led to positive changes in how they communicated and supported each other. They'd developed better boundaries around personal information while maintaining emotional closeness, and they'd created systems for verifying unusual requests or concerns before responding with assistance or resources. Elena's grandmother Rosa had become a respected voice in elder fraud prevention, sharing her experience at senior centers and community organizations throughout the region. Her transformation from victim to advocate had inspired other elderly individuals to become more proactive about protecting themselves while maintaining their generous and trusting natures with appropriate safeguards. The broader impact of Elena's case extended beyond her immediate family and community. The federal investigation that grew from her experience had resulted in policy changes at financial institutions, improvements in law enforcement training programs, and enhanced cooperation between agencies investigating family-based fraud networks. Elena often reflected on how a simple incident of missing car keys had revealed a web of deception that could have continued indefinitely if not exposed. The violation of trust had been painful, but the discovery had ultimately protected her family from even more serious harm and had helped law enforcement dismantle a criminal network that was victimizing families across multiple states. The professional relationships that Elena had thought were damaged by Beatrice's malicious campaign had actually grown stronger through the crisis. Colleagues who had supported her during the investigation became closer professional allies, and the reputation she'd gained for handling adversity with integrity had opened doors to leadership opportunities she might never have otherwise received. Elena's success story became a model for other professionals dealing with character assassination and harassment campaigns. Her strategy of immediate transparency, comprehensive documentation, and proactive legal response had minimized the long-term damage while exposing the perpetrator's criminal activities quickly and effectively. The emotional healing for Elena and her family was ongoing but substantial. They'd learned to distinguish between healthy family loyalty and enabling destructive behavior, developed better skills for recognizing manipulation and deception, and strengthened their appreciation for the relationships that were genuinely supportive and trustworthy. Elena's victim advocacy work had connected her with other professionals who had experienced similar betrayals, creating a network of mutual support and shared expertise. These relationships had enriched her personal life while expanding her professional opportunities and community impact. The financial security that Elena had built through her successful practice had been tested but not destroyed by Beatrice's attacks. The experience had taught her additional strategies for protecting her assets and reputation while maintaining the professional generosity and community service that gave her work meaning beyond financial success. As Elena looked toward the future, she felt confident in her ability to handle whatever challenges might arise while maintaining the values and relationships that truly mattered to her. The experience with Beatrice had been a devastating betrayal, but it had also revealed Elena's own strength and resilience while demonstrating the power of truth and justice to ultimately prevail over deception and malice. The missing keys that had started everything were now kept in a secure location in Elena's home, serving as a reminder of how a single incident could change everything and how important it was to trust her instincts about people and situations. The lesson had been expensive in emotional terms, but the wisdom gained had been invaluable for protecting herself and helping others avoid similar experiences. Elena's story had become part of the family's history, a cautionary tale, but also a testament to their resilience and commitment to protecting each other. Future generations would know about the cousin who had betrayed their trust, but they would also learn about the strength and unity that had emerged from facing that betrayal together. The engagement party where it all began was now remembered not for the celebration that was interrupted, but for the moment when truth began to emerge from a web of lies that had been building for months. Elena's missing keys had unlocked more than just her car that night. They had unlocked the truth that ultimately set her family free from someone who had been systematically exploiting their love and trust. In the end, Beatrice had indeed been locked out, not just from Elena's car or her grandmother's house, but from the family and community she had betrayed. Her actions had consequences that reached far beyond anything she had probably imagined when she first decided to hide those keys as an act of petty spite. Elena's triumph was not just personal but professional and communal, demonstrating that integrity and transparency could overcome even sophisticated attacks on reputation and livelihood. Her experience had made her stronger, wiser, and more committed to helping others, while maintaining the compassion and generosity that had always defined her character. The future held promise for Elena and her family, built on a foundation of authentic relationships, hard-earned wisdom, and the knowledge that they could weather serious challenges together. The betrayal by someone they had loved and trusted had been devastating, but their recovery had revealed strengths they hadn't known they possessed and had deepened their appreciation for the relationships that truly deserved their loyalty and love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.